Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Appreciate everyone joining. I know there are competing breakout sessions, so thanks for taking the time. My name is Kumar Chandran. I'm the policy director at ReFed. This session is about state and local policy solutions. I am going to keep sort of my intro super short and turn it over to the panelists. Just so that we have more time for Q&A at the end. But just a couple of sort of housekeeping notes, like this session will be recorded, so people that aren't able to attend can watch it afterwards, so just be aware that it's being recorded. And also ask everyone to turn off their ringers and that kind of thing. All the panelists, their bios are on the website, so I'm not going to go through all of that. And as terms as the agenda, we're going to have sort of 2 rounds of questions for the panelists. They'll each speak for about 5 minutes each, and then at the end, hopefully have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So with that, I'm going to just pass it down. The first round of questions, or is more of just sort of introductions and that kind of thing, is just we can go down the line and ask everyone to just introduce themselves, where they work, what their role is, and a brief description of the food waste policy that's happening in city or state.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Tyler Markham with the City of Austin. I work at Austin Resource Recovery, which is our recycling, trash, compost collection department. We're an enterprise department, and we primarily serve 1 to 4 units directly through our collection services. But then my team regulates Austin's business community for multifamily properties, commercial businesses, and food permitted businesses. And I'm really excited to be here at ReFed. I kind of started my food waste journey about 15 years ago when I learned how much food was really being thrown away. And then after college, I worked for our regional food bank in Austin and been using ReFed's data to really inform a lot of that work. In 2011, the City of Austin passed our Zero Waste Master Plan, which really directed the city towards how we were going to get to zero waste, which we defined as 90% reduction of materials going to the landfill by 2040. We're at about 42% right now, and we've kind of stuck there for a little while, so I'll talk about that some more later. But a big part of our plan is organics diversion, because we measured what's going to the landfill, and about 40% of those materials could be composted. And another aspect of our ordinance was the ordinance went into effect in 2011, but the food waste for businesses requirement rolled out 2016 to 2019. And so all food permitted businesses in Austin, and there's about 5,000 of them, are now required to divert their organic material from the landfill either through donation to people, composting, or feeding animals. And our team manages that process, ensuring that the businesses report to the city every year, telling us how they're meeting the ordinance requirements, providing best practices to those businesses, and helping them when they're not quite sure how to meet the requirements. Another aspect of our organics diversion work started a couple of years ago when the city passed or updated our ordinance to require multifamily properties to install compost service at their properties. So that's about 2,200 multifamily properties that the City of Austin doesn't serve directly, and that's where about half of the City of Austin residents live. So we're working with those properties to get them to install the service and also educate the residents about how to actually compost and divert material. Looking forward, we're also exploring how we can increase some of the requirements for larger businesses. And over the next few years, we're going to explore adding tiered requirements for grocery stores or very large generators so that they really are required to divert more of their material than they currently are.
Great, thank you. If you don't mind, I think we have a little bit of time. Can I just ask a follow-up in terms of the ordinance? Can you talk a little bit about how that came to be? Like, was it like a city council thing, or how did they establish that?
Yeah, so Austin's really lucky to have had an ordinance for so long, and a lot of it came out of a strong environmental movement in the early 2000s. We received, the city, this is before my time, but a lot of the community was concerned about materials going to the landfill's filling up, and we restructured our solid waste department at the time into a more into a resource recovery department, where we're focused on the circular economy and reducing the materials and treating them as resources. At the time, the ordinance was a compromise between a lot of different stakeholders. We had a lot of involvement from the haulers, from the business community, and there were things that maybe we would have liked to have included. So I mentioned the tiered requirements. I think that was something that we would have liked to include at the beginning, to require certain kinds of businesses to compost the food that they can't donate. But it was maybe a little bit ambitious at the time to require that. So that's something that we're looking at now, and we're continuing to work with our community and our stakeholders to improve the ordinance.
Great, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kelsey DeFrancia and I am the Circular Economy Senior Administrator for the City and County of Denver. Right now I am leading our Universal Recycling and Composting Ordinance, which is similar to Austin's, and ours goes into effect later this year. So about 80% of the waste generated in Denver comes from sectors that the city does not service directly. Again, similar to Austin, the city only provides hauling, which includes recycling and composting, to single-family homes and to small apartment buildings, and so that's only about 20%. And so this ordinance is really about closing that gap by requiring that those services are set up by essentially everyone else. So it is a very comprehensive ordinance. It includes minimum recycling and composting requirements for multifamily buildings, food businesses, and permitted events, and then recycling requirements for non-residential buildings and for construction and demolition projects. So the opportunity this creates is huge. From a food waste organics perspective, there are over 10,000 buildings in Denver. Half of them are multifamily residential buildings, representing about 170,000 multifamily residential units, which will all have access to composting. Over 2,500 restaurants and a number of other food businesses are going to be required to divert their food waste. And for outdoor permitted events, over 90% of annual attendees will have access to composting and recycling. And I do emphasize the word access because this is really about providing the services and providing the education. It's not about perfection from day one. We know that participation and contamination are going to be real challenges. Success is going to take time. It's going to be a really big transition for our community, and a big lift for both the city and for our community members. Internally, we have 7 different agencies involved. I work for the Office of Climate Action, but different departments interact with different regulated entities across the city. For example, we have 3 different departments that permit outdoor events depending on where the event is being held. Some buildings are licensed, many are not. So coordination across agencies has been a really big part of this effort and will continue to be. For the community, many businesses and property owners and permittees will be setting up these diversion services, recycling and composting for the first time. A lot of building residents will be learning how to recycle or compost for the first time. Haulers are going to have new customers, increased demand. So because of that, we are trying to really pair requirements with support. We've been developing best practice guides and standardized signage templates, educational materials, and we already have some granted very small financial programs in place to help restaurants reduce food waste and switch from disposables to reusables, and even offset some of their composting service costs if they participate in one of the waste reduction programs. Again, these financial programs right now are a pretty small percentage of the restaurants that will be required to comply with the ordinance later this year. But it is really important to us to not only support diversion, but to also simultaneously support waste reduction and prevention, because we know that those things should come first, and it does make it a lot easier to set up diversion services if you are creating less waste in the first place. So ultimately, this universal recycling and composting ordinance, it's not just about setting expectations, but it's also about providing the tools and the systems and support structures that people need to succeed over time. It is a really ambitious effort for Denver. We've learned a lot talking to our colleagues in other cities. And although we wish we had more time, Denverites have really been asking for this for a long time. And so we are also really excited to start implementing it later this year.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Fisher. I am Deputy Division Director of Solid Waste at the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. So what that means, the role I have is overseeing our statewide solid waste management programs in Massachusetts, which includes our policies, our regulations, our grants and technical assistance programs, our education and outreach, and in the context of waste disposal bans, our inspections, compliance, and enforcement work, which I'll get to in a moment. We also have 4 regional offices, so they do all of our site-specific inspections, compliance, and enforcement, but we do, out of our headquarters Boston office, we hold all of our waste ban compliance and enforcement work. So in Massachusetts, like all throughout the Northeast US, we have very strained solid waste disposal capacity. And it's getting worse. There's no relief in sight, and it's just going to keep on getting worse. Solid waste disposal capacity in Massachusetts, it's subject to what's called a local solid waste site assignment approval. So those sites have to be approved by a local board of health. And then if they are, then they come to us for permitting. And we'll typically permit what comes to us. We have rigorous permitting requirements, but it needs that local approval, and there's no community in Massachusetts that is interested in siting a landfill or municipal waste energy facility anytime in the foreseeable future. So what that means for us is that we've talked a lot at this conference, and we always speak about all the reasons why capturing food materials is important, getting food to those in need, getting food to feed animals, enriching our soil, preventing methane emissions from landfills, all important reasons. And we value all of those. But for us, this is really about waste management capacity also, because we do not have a place to send our solid waste. We send about 40% of our trash on an annual basis goes to states as distant as Michigan, Ohio, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina by rail. And it's going to keep on going there. And if those states don't want it, then it's going to go farther. And that's not a good solution for anyone. It's a very fragile waste management infrastructure. It lacks resilience. So it's critical for us to do all we can to reduce the amount of waste we're disposing. And so we have a solid waste master plan that guides our statewide policy framework to do that. And like everywhere else in the country, when you look at waste characterization data for the solid waste stream, food waste is always a huge chunk, and even bigger if you consider compostable paper and leaves and yard waste and other compostable materials. So, I think in Massachusetts now we're at about 23.5% is food waste, and if you put those other organic materials in, again, substantially larger. So in 2014, well, really we'd been working on this for decades, but in 2014 we implemented our commercial organics disposal ban. At that point, it applied to businesses and institutions that disposed of 1 ton or more per week. 2 reasons for that. One, that was the most cost-effective scale to implement food waste diversion, and that was also where we felt we could most effectively support it. We had what we thought were about 2,000 entities that needed to comply with that, and we thought that was a manageable universe to support. So that's why we set it there. We had, all leading up to the ban, we had a voluntary certification program with supermarkets. We demonstrated in practice this could be done cost effectively. One of the things about limited disposal capacity that's good, from my perspective it's good, is that solid waste disposal is very expensive in the Northeast. So when you look at cost effectiveness of food waste diversion programs, it's much easier to get a cost effective food waste program if you have super high disposal fees, which our businesses and municipalities don't appreciate that, but I do as a policymaker. So It makes our work easier. And so one of the things I think I'm most proud of is when we went out to public comment on our first food waste disposal ban, we received 0 comments in opposition from the regulated community. And that was because of all the upfront work we did. We were able to show it was cost effective. And we also launched a business technical assistance program leading up to the ban to help support it. In 2022, we lowered the ban threshold from 1 ton to a ½ ton per week, which is where we're at right now. And I'll talk a little bit more later. We're at a really, I think our most significant pivot point right now, where we're starting to think more about, we've done pretty well with getting that food waste captured. It's been pretty effective. So we're starting to think about how can we now capture food waste from smaller business generators and from the residential waste stream. Much harder waste stream for us to capture, but that's really where the substantial majority of our food waste disposal remains. So that's where we'll be focused going forward.
Great, thank you. Just real quick, I see some folks are standing in the back. If you want to stand, you're welcome to, but we also have some seats up front. Just feel free. Anyway, pass it on.
Good morning, y'all. Thanks so much for coming. Y'all, don't be scared. You can come and sit with us. Come on. Hey, y'all. My name is Aura Kemp. I serve as Senior Policy Advisor with the New York City Mayor's Office of Food Policy. Our office was codified into the city charter in 2020, and we were tasked with the really phenomenal mission of addressing food insecurity, so increasing overall food security across our city, ensuring that people have access to and are consuming healthy foods, and making sure that our local economies around food and the jobs that are provided within that system are good quality jobs that really are sustained over time. And one of the very first tasks that we were presented with was creating a food policy plan to act as the policy framework and the strategic guidance document for really tackling what is a massive food system for a city of 9 million people. And in 2022, we released Food Forward, our 10-year food policy plan, that outlined our strategy of how we plan to approach addressing building a more sustainable and equitable food system for our city. And it was grounded within 5 core goals. The first one is making sure that New Yorkers have multiple ways to access healthy, affordable, and culturally representative and relevant foods for their family. The second is looking at the environment through which we procure and bring food into our city, making sure that those systems and mechanisms are sustainable and provide good quality jobs. We're also looking at how we can ensure that the food that's coming into our city is being distributed, managed, and disposed of sustainably. We also want to make sure that we are being good allies and partners with our growing networks that exist outside of our city as a city of consumers. And most importantly, I feel, is developing the skills and knowledge and resources to build the sustainability into our food systems planning so that they can last beyond a single administration and really support long-term adoption. So our team essentially acts as like a liaison between all of our city agencies. In New York City, we have about $500 million of food purchasing that the city does directly to support things like our Department of Education, which is the largest school food system in the country and is directly under the purview of our Department of Health and our office to create things like our food standards and meal standards that shape how those $5 million are spent. So it's $500 million. Those $500 million a year are 500 million opportunities for us to really dive into the values that we want to promote and preserve and in making sure that we are investing in those systems. We also oversee our Department of Corrections and Administration for Children's Services, so things like our juvenile detention facilities and supporting and ensuring that the food that we're providing is investing in the rehabilitation of folks who are within our carceral systems. We also oversee things like our Department for the Aging and our emergency food systems, soup kitchens, and food pantries. So we're investing in those food access points. We want to make sure that we are doing it in a way that's supportive of and really reflective of the values that we have as a city. So as we work across all of our city agencies, one of the key things that we do is looking at that knowledge and skill building. Our Department of Education has a very robust team and budget, so they're able to dive into creating resources and tools and recipe testing in ways that maybe our juvenile detention facility doesn't have that same capacity. So our office will look at opportunities there to share in best practices and learning, and that also extends into how it is that we are managing both our food preparation to reduce overall waste and how we are diverting from our waste streams as we are looking at building more circularity within our institutional food service. One of the biggest things that we also look at is our infrastructure and how we are investing in systems that allow for our food to flow in a way that is responsible. And we believe that 3 core pieces of our work is one, like delivering on good governance. As it was shared before, like you can propose things or mandate things, but if you don't have a system in place to really support the adoption of that behavior change within the system, it won't be sustained. So good governance is really important to us. Also, like supporting and improving overall public health. Like food is directly tied to our health outcomes, but it also impacts things like air quality and cleanliness and quality of life across our city. And the third is really looking at that piece around quality of life. And I'm sure you guys have heard with our new mayor, a really big thing that he is driving forward is affordability as a part of our quality of life considerations. So we're really looking at how we can advance all 3 of those through things like our Food Forward 10-year food policy plan and creating that policy infrastructure to advance those values.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to do one round of questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for Q&A. So all of you can start thinking about the questions you want to ask. So my first question is for Kelsey. You described the sort of stages that you're in regarding sort of the implementation of your policy. Can you talk a little bit about how the policy came about and the stakeholders that you're engaging with and sort of how you're balancing their interests? You talked a little bit about that, but if you talk about that a little bit more, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah. So our universal recycling and composting ordinance was actually initiated in 2022. It was a community-led and community-written ballot measure. It passed with over 70% of Denver voters' support. So there was obviously a really strong signal from the community that they really want access to recycling and composting services. Because the original ordinance was written by the community, we then had to undertake a process as the city to refine the ordinance language, to update it, things like making sure the correct departments were identified, making sure that the requirements were clear, and making sure it could actually be implemented. So as part of that process, a task force was convened with a number of different stakeholders, including those that would be regulated under the ordinance, as well as advocates and council members and other stakeholders, and they made recommendations to modify the ordinance. From there, numerous city agencies worked together to develop updated ordinance language that balanced several goals at once. So addressing those task force recommendations, making sure that we were also honoring the original intent and original impact of the ordinance, while also making sure, again, that requirements and enforcement were realistic and achievable. And that balancing act has really been the central challenge of this work, of my work. Again, this is a very ambitious ordinance, and in government it can sometimes feel like you're being told you're both doing too much and too little at the same time. I don't know if any of my colleagues would agree.
Yes.
So on one hand, advocates and several council members wanted to keep the strongest requirements possible to ensure the broadest environmental impact and the most amount of access. And then on the other side, there are real operational and economic realities and concerns from businesses and property owners and from other council members. Restaurants are probably the clearest example of this tension. Denver has lost a significant number of restaurants since COVID. Denver has also recently seen one of the sharpest declines in restaurant spending, I think the sharpest decline out of any major city in the US. And so adding new operational costs right now is a real concern for business owners, for the mayor's office, for other council members. But at the same time, food waste aversion is one of the biggest opportunities for environmental impact. We know that food waste is the single largest category in our commercial waste stream. We are at 24%, so similar to what John said. Based on our latest commercial waste study, 24% of our waste stream is food waste. So ultimately, we made compromises based on 3 questions. Where can we make the biggest impact? Where can we reduce burden on our community members? And also what makes the most sense administratively, because this is also an unfunded mandate and we don't actually have dedicated staff to implement this. So for food waste specifically, that meant adjusting requirements so that composting is only required for licensed food businesses. And this is the food business area, right? Because multifamily also has to do composting. But for food businesses, this meant composting is only required for licensed food businesses because they have regular touch points with city agencies, and it's only required back of house. So for restaurants, this is in kitchen areas. Composting requirements are not for customer-facing areas or for mobile food vendors like food trucks, because that is where it is harder to control disposal and contamination, and so that's not going to be the biggest impact. And then the ordinance also includes different pathways for compliance, like food donation, and also exemptions for things like economic hardship when it's truly needed. The revised ordinance was finalized and adopted in the fall of last year, 2025. It was a long process. And now we are developing the rules and regulations. And if you're not familiar, the ordinance sets kind of the high-level requirements, and then the rules and regulations provide the additional clarity, the additional details you need to actually implement and comply with those requirements. So as part of that, we've continued to do extensive stakeholder outreach, engaging with restaurants and building owners and event organizers and contractors and haulers and so many community members through public feedback sessions, individual meetings, emails. And this has really helped us understand the questions and the real world challenges that will be faced in setting up these services. So a major focus has been building flexibility into our rules where possible, again, while still maintaining the original intent of the ordinance. And as I mentioned, we are also still developing as many resources as we can possibly develop to help people comply. And finally, we are approaching this first year with an education-first approach. We're not starting with financial penalties. Our goal is really to partner with the community and learn from implementation, continue to gather feedback, and ultimately refine the program over time as we better understand both the challenges and the opportunities.
Thank you. You have been busy. Next question is for Aura. You referenced this in your opening remarks, but you all had a recent transition in leadership, and so wanted to see if you can talk about how your office is working to develop buy-in with new leadership, particularly around the city's food waste reduction efforts.
Have you guys heard about our new mayor? Yeah. We welcomed into the mayor's office in January Mayor Zoran Kwame Mamdani, who ran on a real commitment to ensuring that people had access to affordable food. And when we developed our Food Forward 10-year food policy plan, we did it at that time, that length of time, because it would allow us to straddle multiple administrations. Sustainability is also part of our strategic moves, right? So being able to adopt a plan that allows us to really look at the continuity of the introductions of policy, behavior change, and interventions is really core to our work long term. There is no single administration that will be able to deliver on every single part of our quality of life commitments and our food diversion commitments. So it is meant to be a long-term strategy. And we have other strategic documents that also guide that work. And we feel, especially with this admin, we have the opportunity to highly align on the values and impact of diversion on quality of life. So part of that is making sure that we're actually able to measure some of the like the intangibles, right? Things like air quality is a really big issue, especially around our transportation. And we see that neighborhoods like Hunts Point, that is home to the Hunts Point Distribution Center, has a tremendous number of diesel-powered trucks that are used for both storage of fresh produce because it has outgrown the scale of the refrigeration on site, but also for transportation of our food across the city. And that has led to neighborhoods around Hunts Point having some of the highest rates of child asthma and hospitalizations of children due to asthma-related issues in the country. So improving our infrastructure and transportation models to reduce emissions is a public health outcome and strategy, but it's also something that improves the resilience of our food system. So linking together the human-centered values that also come through adoption of diversion and circular food system integration is really a key way that we can communicate around the value of adopting these policy approaches. Another thing that we're looking at is, you may have heard Mamdani say this, like, no problem too big, no task too small. And that it really gets at the point of like we all have a role to play in contributing to this larger shift away from a linear food system and towards a more circular one. We as a city of 9 million are at the very end of our current linear food flow. So we have a tremendous amount of food that comes into our city. We don't have a lot of space to hold on to that food. So it kind of drives a lot of it into our waste stream. And we have an opportunity to build the infrastructure and economies that would help us to create circularity. And that means that it's up to, you know, our behaviors within our household and our own kitchens. How are we ensuring that we're eating more of the food that we're purchasing as opposed to throwing it into our waste stream? It's also like, how are we procuring food for our city to make sure that we're preparing delicious meals? Because when the food tastes good, people don't waste it, right? It's also integrating things from other strategic plans that align with the values of our administration. So Plan YC was developed as almost like our climate strategy for New York, and that was introduced before Mamdani came into office, and that is something that the core pieces of that climate action plan, they help us to realize more of the aspirational pieces within our food policy plan. So being able to look at climate impact through built environment. In New York City, the largest contributor to emissions is transportation, followed by buildings, and then food. So the opportunity for us to improve all three of those through strategic plans like Plan YC is not just going to improve quality of life for New Yorkers, but it's also going to improve our circular food system adoption. We're also looking at things like collaborations with our Department of Sanitation. We rolled out citywide organics, and the first place that we looked was residential food waste. We did our waste characterization studies and found that the largest proportion of food that goes into our waste stream from households is in fully intact and unopened packaging. Stop and think about that. Like, we are not only purchasing a lot of food, we're purchasing food that is more expensive and we're throwing more of it into the trash. Who would throw a plate full of money into the trash? We have an opportunity to also address things like food affordability by integrating better circular models for food diversion, better education of how to use more of the food that we're purchasing, but also looking at all of the pieces along the entire food flow spectrum, like food date labels to improve the shelf life and overall utilization of the food that's coming into our system. So really speaking to the values that he carries and reflecting that in our strategic approaches and showing how adopting circular food models for diversion and reduction of waste will help to achieve a more affordable and better quality of life for our residents.
Thank you. Next question is for Tyler. Tyler, you talked a little bit about this in your opening. You require businesses to submit recycling and organics plans each year. Can you talk about how you're using that data to measure the success of your program?
Yeah. Thanks. I'll echo what Ora said earlier a little bit, that food waste is a really big problem, but it's made up of so many little decisions that people are making every day. Our food waste ordinance applies to about 5,000 food permitted businesses and about 2,200 multifamily properties where hundreds of thousands of Austinites are living at. And so what our team is doing is collecting information from the management companies at each of those locations, letting us know how they're complying with the ordinance. And over the last few years, what we've done to really streamline our team's work, we have about 4 or 5 people working on this ordinance, and so we really have to be careful with their time and use our resources as efficiently as we can. What we've done over the last few years is really invest a lot into our data systems. We've created a system where we're bringing in data from our appraisal districts, our public health department, and our utility billing system, as well as from the recycling reports and organics plans that businesses are submitting to us. And we're merging that into a geodatabase that we hired a contractor to create and recently hired a full-time data analyst to oversee, so that we're bringing in those pieces of data, and we're able to, for each location that's affected by the ordinance, blend that information so that we're able to see who's responsible at that business. Are they part of a larger parent company that we can do outreach to? Have they reported this year? Did they report the last several years? And are there different types of businesses that are struggling more with the ordinance that we can develop materials and best practices for? Are there some that are doing really great that we can look to collect best practices? And so we've collected all of that data, and we're using it to direct our efforts. About 2 years ago, in October 2024, the city instituted a requirement for multifamily properties to have compost service, which is a really big next step in our zero waste journey. As of now, about 65% of those 2,200 multifamily properties have the required compost service at their location. So that's 1 gallon per unit per week that the residents have access to, and we're able to see whether that location reported this year or last year and what they've reported in the past. And over the last few months, we've been working with some of the larger companies that have not reported to us or have not reported that their properties are in compliance. I think something that was not fully understood when the ordinance was going into effect was the scale at which we needed to manage this information. There's just, like, we're keeping track of the contact information for every business in the city that has private trash service, which is quite a lot for our team to manage. And so our system has really streamlined that and allowed us to, since the ordinance started, we've received these recycling organics reports from about 92% of all of the businesses that are affected by the ordinance. And the vast majority, at some point or other, they have submitted a compliant plan to the city. And we're now in the place where we can work with those remaining 8% or so to transfer them to our code compliance department. They also have a bottleneck, so we're diving into the data to determine, which businesses should we send to code compliance that maybe they've never submitted a report, maybe they're a large business that has a lot of waste, and we can prioritize our compliance resources to address those locations. But then there's another group of people where maybe they've submitted their report, once or twice in the last 5 years, and it's not worth it for us to send our compliance team out there, but we can work with our internal staff at the department to do some more personalized outreach to them and try to understand why they're struggling with the ordinance requirements, why they might not have reported. And then once we do get the report and we're able to see exactly what's going on in their property, we work with hundreds of businesses each year to do kind of like a waste consulting work with them to see how they can meet the ordinance intent, even if they can't quite get to the requirements to be fully compliant. And that's how we were using our data to really drive the success of our ordinance.
Great, thank you. Okay, last question is for John. John, you teased this during your opening remarks, but you talked about how your food waste diversion policies had primarily applied to the larger sources, but you're now looking looking at pivoting towards a smaller one. So can you talk more about your thought process for that and potential next steps?
Yeah, so I guess the place to start is we've made what I feel is pretty good progress with compliance among at least the entities subject to the 1 ton per week disposal ban threshold. We've seen, we gather data about the number of businesses that have food waste collection service, and that has gone up from 1,350 in 2014 when we started to about 4,100 today. So we know a lot of businesses have food waste collection. That in itself doesn't guarantee compliance. Sometimes we still see non-compliance among businesses that have food waste collection, but they have the service, they have the system in place, and sometimes they just need to get back on track. So we're not done there. We have more work to do there, and we will forever. We're still trying to enforce our 1990 cardboard disposal ban. So we're going to be doing that on with food waste in 2050, and but with that said, the gains among those largest businesses are more on the margins now, and we're kind of seeing diminishing returns. We've actually seen our food waste diversion, which has been great. Our progress has leveled off over the past couple of years. So we realized that we've kind of reached the limits of our current approach. And we know there's a lot of food waste from residents, I think more from residents than businesses at this point, a lot of food waste from small businesses, and I would characterize mixed compliance among the businesses that are subject to the half-ton per week threshold, not the 1 ton per week threshold, but that medium category of businesses. And that's a more nuanced, complex dynamic, but the bottom line is we conduct our inspections at solid waste facilities. It's harder to identify violations from those businesses, harder to do compliance enforcement, and we have to do it a little bit differently. So what we're thinking about now is how can we get to the rest of this food waste, or more of the rest of this food waste, out of the trash. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to make that happen, but we have floated a proposal very informally that would be kind of a 2-stage expansion of the disposal ban. The first would be lowering the commercial waste ban threshold down to 0, or basically eliminating the threshold from for the food waste disposal ban. That doesn't literally mean 0, because all of our other waste ban materials have no threshold, and we don't enforce those down to 0. So we're not talking about enforcing down to 0, but what it does do is actually help us get better compliance at this half-ton per week threshold, because we don't necessarily have to document it's exactly a half-ton per week or more, which is difficult to do in a load of trash. So that lower threshold would really be most effective at that half-ton to 1 ton per week level, and it would help below that, but it would also kind of get those medium businesses. And then beyond that, talking about a residential food waste disposal ban is kind of a later stage. To make all this work, Kelsey mentioned cost and business burden and compromise. That's all going to play into it. We need more infrastructure, and we need different infrastructure to manage food waste from these sources. So that takes time. We need investments in, we need haulers to invest in collection equipment. We need to support that through our grant programs. We need more distributed capacity so that we can shorten collection and transportation distances for food waste collection routes to make them more cost effective. Because if we may not be able to get everybody to cost neutral, but if we're posing substantial additional costs for businesses, it's not going to fly. So we got to figure out how to make the system as cost effective as possible. We've always been agnostic about what form of technology infrastructure takes: anaerobic digestion, composting, animal feed. We welcome all of it. Going back to what I said at the beginning, every ton out of the solid waste stream is a win for us. So whichever of those technologies works in the marketplace, we'll support it. We need to think about going higher up the food scale, to think about more food waste prevention. We don't have a donation requirement, but we can foster and encourage more food donation rescue, which can be a more cost-effective option. We're going to take advantage of that and get more benefit in that space. And then we have to work a lot with our 351 municipalities, who are basically the ones who run all the residential programs around the state. And there's, just as we can't impose substantial additional costs on businesses, we also can't impose substantial additional costs on municipalities without providing the funding for it. So we need to really address the infrastructure and address the cost to even seriously proceed with an expanded ban. So that's where we want to get to, but we have a lot of work to get there.
Great, thank you. Okay, we are going to open it up to questions from the audience. I'm happy to walk around here with this.
Great, thank you all. I get to work in California, where there's a organics ban, SB 1383. It also includes a food recovery, a food donation mandate for large food generating businesses like your Costco's, wholesalers, hotels. And I'm always curious why cities that are progressive with organics disposal ordinances, why they aren't pursuing that food donation piece. Is that something that your cities are looking into? And if not, why is that? Why not?
I can say that our ordinance does include a food donation piece. So in terms of complying with composting requirements in Denver, you can either set up hauling services, you can self-haul, or you can do food donation. Again, we're at the very early stages of implementation, so I think we're going to have to explore a little bit more how to really support those systems and support compliance in that way. Because I think hiring a hauler is going to be the easiest thing to do for a lot of businesses and buildings, but food donation is written into our ordinance, just something that we need to work on really promoting from the start.
And I'll say for New York City, we have a statewide diversion policy, but New York City is carved out of that policy just because of its unique composition. That said, there is a case to be made for us to adopt more of the donation-specific diversion, especially when we look at the amount of money that we invest in things like our emergency feeding. So New York City per year, this year was actually the baseline was increased. We're at $57 million a year that goes to direct food purchasing to supply to our emergency food network. And that $57 million could be invested in other places if we had alternative supplies coming into the emergency food network. And if you look at something like Hunts Point, if we diverted 5% of the surplus food moving through Hunts Point, it would increase the volume of food going into our emergency food network by 20%. We currently, at $57 million a year, are providing 20% of the emergency food into the network. So imagine being able to completely take that $57 million and invest it into other parts of our system, this just through having better mechanisms for capture and redistribution, which is a key part of what we're looking to integrate with the Hunts Point Produce Market redesign, is an opportunity to create those diversion systems so that we can bolster the influx of food going into our emergency food and be more responsible with our budget so that we can invest in other parts of our city's infrastructure.
I can just add one more point about that. Our food waste disposal ban is set within our solid waste facility regulations. So those regulations just say what you cannot do. So you cannot dispose of food material into solid waste. It doesn't have any requirements about what you must do instead. So any of the alternatives for food waste diversion are compliant with the food waste disposal ban. With that said, we do try to support, foster, encourage businesses to set up both prevention and donation rescue initiatives. One of the things that's interesting is we have our Recycling Works Massachusetts Technical Assistance Program, and one of the dynamics that they've seen often is that when a business begins a separate food waste collection program, one of the things that accomplishes is it shines a light on how much food waste they have, and it's usually more than they thought. And it also gives them the opportunity to see what that food waste is. And that often leads to, it sounds backwards, but they start lower on the scale, and when they start with separating food waste for composting, that often leads to a donation or a prevention initiative because of the added knowledge they gained.
Hi, My name is Natalie. I'm with Rust Belt Riders Composting in Cleveland. We're a community composter. We have grown. You know, we started off like many small composters on bikes, and now we're a team of 35, positioning ourselves to be the waste hauler for all of Cleveland. Many surrounding cities in the greater Cleveland area have contracts with us. We are growing and scaling using grant funding. Like John said, we're a really great relationship with the Solid Waste District. We've gotten grants from the USDA, and we're one of this year's grant recipients from ReFed. Thank you. So it's been awesome to see how community composters can become serious haulers, you know, serious processors. We're selling the soil back into the community in northeastern Ohio. We're diverting over 800,000 pounds a month in northeastern Ohio. We were so excited to hear about the New York City mandate. And when we hosted the 2004 Community Composters Coalition Conference, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, we hosted it in Cleveland in 2024. And our keynote speaker was Domingo Morales, who is from Compost Power. He grew up in the housing projects in the Bronx, and he brought composting to so many residences. I mean, his work, like BK Rott, there are just all these cool community composters that were doing the work, introducing it to underserved communities, introducing it to many communities in New York. And he came to us and he's like, you know, I've been written up in the New York Times like in the last few months, and right after that, Eric Adams defunded every community composter and gave that mandate contract to Waste Management, to Denali, to huge, you know, who are doing good work. But the problem with doing it and just, let's just take it back out of the communities, let's put it to these huge waste haulers, the contamination has been really tough, right? Like when you don't have these orgs who know the community, who are integrated in the neighborhoods, and you're just, you know, you're driving by in a huge truck and a fleet of trucks, yeah, you get trash. And so I'm just wondering, is it on Mom Donnie's radar? Is it on your office's radar to get money back into the hands of community composters, get them even out there doing education, even running programs to supplement? If they don't have the infrastructure to do hauling, they're not able, maybe you need too much money to get them all the trucks that you would need. Like, how can you work community composting back in, not just for like feel good, you know, because it's more efficacious, because you actually get better compliance, better awareness in the local community by empowering community composters to become the serious part of the solution.
I really, No, I really appreciate both the work that you do. It's incredibly necessary for all of us to be like tapped into what our role is in being able to contribute to creating these better, more sustainable food systems. And it's true, it's incredibly difficult to maintain that continuity when funding is so unpredictable. And I think that's something that all of us in this room has been experiencing, especially as funding lines have been cut and programs have been interrupted. You know, when we rolled out citywide organics, the first thing that we looked at was residential, and there was a penalty associated with noncompliance. So we had invested in expansion of our organics processing facility on Staten Island so that we were ready to take on full diversion of organics into our facility there. We had also retrofitted all of our trash trucks. So instead of having a whole additional fleet specifically for collecting things like organics, they retrofitted all of our trucks, splitting them down the middle so that organics would go onto one side and materials would go onto the other. So it allowed us to both be able to collect more readily, but also using the resources we already had in place for that collection. Now, when it first rolled out, it had the penalty associated with it. And then after many complaints from large-scale like apartment building owners and things, the penalty was redacted. And with that, it kind of like fired up a lot of these community composters to say like, okay, what can we do to really apply that additional pressure? They ended up advocating and they got the penalty reintroduced. So now non-compliance will get you a fine per unit of $500 to $300 per occurrence, depending on the size and scale of the building. We've also introduced things like our Trash Academy. I don't know if you guys have ever been so interested in trash, but it's super fun. And again, it's that educational component of really being able to let folks know like our food flow doesn't stop at your trash can. Like, it doesn't stop at your plate. It's a continuous cycle, and we have to actively educate people on that. And one thing that Mom Donnie's team is really phenomenal at is the community engagement and communication. Like, we have our Office of Mass Engagement, and they're essentially taking their same approach to like grassroots information sharing that they took on the campaign trail and bringing it into the mayor's office. So the ability for us to be able to go directly to our community members and build their knowledge of diversion, but also, again, we need the funds to ensure that these programs are offered continuously so that once the behavior is adopted, it is maintained. Our goal is to get to a point where we are the first large city to completely eliminate organic waste going into our food, into our waste streams. And I think that we have so much opportunity, especially with this new leadership, to really look at how those values of supporting a truly sustainable city could be adopted through commitments to reintroduce and bring back things like our community composting and education programs. So I really appreciate calling attention to that. We're whispering in ears and working to make sure that that is part of our priorities over this this next 4 years. And we're really excited about the opportunity to partner with Department of Sanitation in the rollout of their solid waste management plan to see how we can continue to expand adoption of organics.
Hi, Linda Bregan with the Environmental Law Institute. I was wondering if you had any advice for cities and states that, let's say, have a little bit of a different resource and political landscape than you all have. I'm from Tennessee. Environmental Law Institute does model ordinances and model laws with NRDC to make it easier for less resourced parts of the country to take action. And these are often based on your amazing models, right? But my question is, do you have any thoughts for how we can get traction to start replicating the kind of work that y'all are doing?
Yeah, I'll add that that's why we have a capacity requirement for businesses and properties. We don't have like a food waste disposal ban because of our state regulatory system. So we're really focusing on just requiring the businesses to have the capacity to divert and to educate their staff and their residents, and providing the resources to enable them to do that.
Can I say I was in Austin recently, and I got to see some of the work that Tyler and his team has been doing. We're part of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, which is a collaboration of urban cities from around the globe. And one of the key things that we're really looking to do is sharing of best practices. Like, how could we standardize best practices, but then not hoard that knowledge, really sharing it generously with others across our network. And within New York City, because we have the scale and capacity, we can pilot a lot of things. Like, we can test out a lot of things. And I think it's important to note that in New York City, we have 197 unique neighborhoods that people live in. Every single neighborhood has a different composition of cultures and income and household levels and composition. So in reality, like, something that might work in Mott Haven in the South Bronx might not work in Park Slope, Brooklyn, right? And we can pilot things based on the specific composition of those neighborhoods and the overall engagement of the community to see what works. When we're able to kind of master a best practice, and going to Austin and seeing the things that they were doing there, I was incredibly inspired to bring back some of those practices to New York and figure out how we could replicate. That kind of sharing across the community is exactly how we can support with, like, figuring out the most cost-effective way to be able to implement in other cities, or how you can get these over thresholds to be able to pass policy that create funding pools that can then go towards implementing these projects. I think the ability for us to standardize best practice and share those out is a key part of that tool, knowledge, and resource building that all of us are very committed to, and we need to continue facilitating those connections so that we can learn from each other, because we're not doing it alone. Like, we can call to things that you guys are doing in Tennessee and be like, this was incredibly effective here. We could replicate that in these neighborhoods and effectively see the same kind of impact. So this is an invitation to everybody in the room to just, like, be generous with those learnings, because we can support in doing some of that standardizing of best practice for implementation across the country.
Just one other thought from my perspective on the state level. I speak with a lot of state officials along the way about what we did, and one of the things I always say is that the approach we took was specific to Massachusetts. It was specific to our statutory and regulatory environment. It was specific to our management capacity, all of that. It was designed for that. So while a lot of it worked well, that doesn't mean you could take that same approach and plop it down in every other state and see the same success. But I think you can take elements of that and implement it in different ways in other states. So certainly like stakeholder engagement, building coalitions, thinking about where there's interest in voluntary initiatives, building voluntary programs, and maybe leading with the top of the food waste scale. So leading with things like prevention and donation and rescue, where I think you can make a better economic case, you can make a better social case. Maybe you just even lead with a food donation requirement, like forget the disposal ban and just focus on the top of the scale, which I think has a little different political dynamic associated with it. And, obviously every state's different, so I can't give specific advice for other specific states because I have no idea. But that's kind of just conceptually think about, try to figure out a better fit, and it may just have to work a little differently.
Sadly, we are out of time. I'm sorry. It is the hour. But I want to, if we can give our panel a round of applause, and thank you. Yeah, and maybe in the future we will allot more time for these things. But thank you. Thanks again. Thanks for all.